Good morning, PT on Ice. Happy Monday. Give me a sec, get the watch set here. Maybe some folks will join us on this beautiful Monday morning. All right, that looks pretty good. Okay, so this morning we got something kind of different to cover. Something I haven't chatted about in a while. Busy weekend. I hope everybody did well. So today we're going to talk about 7 simple truths. Let me get the watch started, and we will get ready to roll. All right. So 7 simple truths. I think the reason why I figured I might cover this, today, really just is because I feel like for me this is like teaching season, which is a little weird because I'm not, I don't really consider myself much of a teacher. Maybe more of a tinkerer, kind of like a sort of person in the lab, a little bit of the mad scientist thing that I talk about. But I feel like there's now some like teaching going on lately, So in addition to the cohorts, which I guess officially makes me a teacher. We got CSM rolling in. I got a couple of presentations there. I've done some visiting some colleges and universities lately, and I got a couple more teed up. And there are a couple of other opportunities to teach. And so what this has gotten me into is starting to think about what are like the simple messages. What are those messages that like are simple truths that we should always be thinking about as clinicians? And this applies whether you are in the clinic and you're treating patients every day, or you're trying to do pop health and you're out and about trying to move the masses. So we got 7 simple things, and I figured what I would do is kind of frame it in a way that sort of takes it from easy and I think simplistic to a little bit more complex. It's fairly ambitious for me because I got 13 minutes and 40 seconds left to get through 7 of them, which is not going to be easy, but I figured I would give it a shot. So the first one, I think this is something that is really starting to make way everywhere, and that is that our senses can get hijacked, right? Like that our sensory system can hijack the brain. And that is something that I think we need to know, whether you are seeing it, and involved in pain science, which is, of course, becoming very much the platform for that message, that, fear and emotions can hijack the brain and sort of make us think and feel things that maybe are a little more, over the top than they otherwise should be. But I think that that's the case both good and bad, right? So there's both a good and a bad part of that. So we can talk about all the negative of that, and certainly I'll leave that to other people. There's plenty of people talking about that. But on the positive side, we can have that same thing happen, right? So you can get overcome with emotion. You can get, a smell that triggers some kind of a memory or something that you ate that sort of, takes you on this kind of journey. And I think that there's something really positive there. And I think as therapists, we need to remember that. We need to understand that that's really what we're doing in many cases. We are trying to stimulate the system to feel something differently, to experience something differently, and that both good and bad, the brain can be hijacked. That's a really important concept, especially when we think about moving populations, because there's the idea of moving individuals, and we can do that kind of one-on-one, but the dynamics of a group are different, and we do need to sort of get a few people on board and take them along. So that's simple truth number 1. Our sensory system can be hijacked. We have to just accept that for what it is, and of course do our best to create some resilience against that whenever we can. 2, we are rarely as helpless as we feel. I think that is probably one of the most important ones, and one that I think that if we can all get that message out and across to other people, we'll do ourselves a real service, and we'll do the service that we need to do to the world at large, right? So the idea that in many ways we often feel like we are in a spot where we can't necessarily overcome. There's just the barrier is too great, or there's just too much in front of us. And that, as we know, can be learned, right? I mean, so Martin Seligman in his early experiments, showed this, that you can learn a certain sense of helplessness. He showed this with animals, and that people kind of follow that same pattern. But we have to just sort of take hope in the fact that it's rarely as helpless or hopeless as it seems, and that there's always some positive step forward that we can make. And so I think that's really important, because that kind of gets me to the next one, which is there is strength in numbers. Right, and so that kind of quickly goes. It's rarely as bad as it seems, and the reason why is because there is strength in numbers. And what I mean by that is we know that, right? We could say that from a research perspective, right? I mean, certainly the sample size makes a difference. Numbers are, the bigger the number, the more strength of the study. But we can also say that just kind of because of that's how human, nature is. That when we're surrounded by other people, when we're locked in with other groups, when we're connected, we are certainly in a more powerful sort of position, a more powerful situation. And I think that that's really important to remember, because what's interesting is that when our sensory systems get hijacked, many times one of the first things that we do is we break off and tend to isolate, right? And we actually give away our power, and the situation seems more helpless, whatever that might be, good, bad, or other. But when we lock in and come together and connect with others and find our tribe, there's something really powerful there, because there's some connection point that allows us to drive forward. And so I think that's, in essence, the element of connect, right? There's power in numbers, and we can never forget that. So number 4 builds on this case a little bit, right? So now you can kind of see the case I'm laying down, hopefully, in these 7 simple truths, and that is the most powerful among us are the ones who unleash the power of others, right? So that's really like there's this struggle, it seems, in our profession and in our world for power, right? Like everybody wants to be in the power seat. They want to be the important person in the room. They want to be the smartest guy or gal in the room or whatever. But what's interesting is that if you really watch the dynamics of people, if you watch the crowd, if you watch the dynamics of people, there goes my dog in the background again with this scratching. If you watch the dynamics of people, the people who give up their power, the people who kind of unleash the power of others, are the ones who are often given the power, right? So it's that idea of servant leadership. Hold on a second, we got it. This has to stop. Hey, knock that off. Okay. So that is kind of simple truth number 4. The most powerful among us are the ones who unleash the power of others and find ways to say, hey, you've got some talent, you've got some skill. I'm going to sort of lay that down for you. Which gets us a little bit to number 5. And I think this is one now is starting to get a little more complex. Understanding the phenomenon in simple terms is better than the components in detailed terms. So that one I want to spend a little bit of time on. I think that's a really important one. Understanding the phenomenon, the situation overall, understanding the big picture, and being able to make it simple is much more valuable than trying to understand the components and details. Man, I got a dog this morning who's killing me. Charlie, come here. Sorry for the interruption here. I'm going to take the collar off because that's driving me crazy. I think it's like every week. All of a sudden on Mondays, he knows that he's got to come in the room and start, scratching at that collar. But I digress. Okay, so back to number 5, right? So understanding the phenomenon in simple terms is more important than understanding the components in detailed terms. And I feel like that kind of gets at the root of reductionism, right? So again, I've talked about this and I've railed about this a little bit, but like this idea, the failure that we have in diving down into the details and trying to understand that one little thing that's going to be so important, that's going to change everything. But yet we live in a complex world where things interact with each other all the time. And so we know that that's inherently flawed. Like that will never, ever work because there are other outside forces that are pressing on the situation, right? So I think I've used the analogy here in the past. If not, I've certainly used it in other places. That idea of squeezing the water balloon, right? So if I squeeze the water balloon on one side, it's going to just pop out on the other side. If I pull a string in the ball of yarn, it's going to tighten something else down. And so the idea that concept, that it's not simple, but we have to try to get it there, right? And I mean, not just our understanding of it, but understanding it in simple terms, because that's the only way we're going to be able to have a conversation about it with someone who maybe doesn't understand it as well. So when we dive into some sort of little tiny itty bitty detail and we try to make everything about that little tiny itty bitty detail, even if there is some support for that, we know overall that that's not going to control the phenomenon. And when we're talking about populations and when we're talking about people, right, we're talking about phenomenon. We're talking about, something that's closer to sociology than chemistry, right? We're talking about things that are like the dynamics of humans. And so because of that, that's very, very different. And I think the more we understand that, the more we get there, the better it's going to be. When you can speak in something where the light bulb goes on and someone can then pass that message on to the next person, that is going to be far more valuable in change. And remember, of course, that's really what we're all doing here. That's what we're selling every single day. Every one of us is selling change. Maybe you're selling change from a knee that doesn't work as well as it should to a knee that works better, or maybe you're selling change from a society that isn't as healthy as it should be to a society that's better, like whatever. But if we're all selling that change, the only way to do that is to get the message to propagate, and the only way to do that is to make it simple enough that the light bulb goes on. And so the narrative matters. Okay, so then we get into number 6, and that is very few things. Now we're getting a little more complex now. Very few things in life are actually linear, right? So like I want to just let that sink in for a second for everybody, because I feel like that's something that we are holding on to. We are gripping. We have the death grip on this idea that we are going to find something that if more is good, or if some is good, more is better. And even more than that would be even better than that. And there are very few things that actually work like that, right? Very few. Even things that we think are like, life supporting, water, air, oxygen, right? Like we know there can be a negative response if we overdose that thing. And yet we keep searching and searching for these linear things where it's like, yeah, if I put more in, I get an even better response. And I just keep getting more and more and more. Okay? And so the idea for us that if we can just kind of buy into the fact that it's more of a U-shaped phenomenon in almost all situations, like there's a nonlinear effect. And if we can start to buy that there's a situation, I mean, this is the profound discovery in our world, right? Like this discovery of load management. To a certain extent, it should shock us that we are seeing this as important as it is, that we can overload the system and that it breaks down, right? Like that should not surprise any of us. That makes total sense that we can overload this. We've known it for years. We've also known that you can underload the system. So yet as a world, we're shocked to find out that sitting too much, right? Like we've spent millions and billions on ergonomic solutions to put people in better static postures, only to find out that static postures by themselves and too high of a dose can be a problem. Like that shouldn't surprise us. It makes total sense, but yet we're sort of surprised in its presentation. That, hey, guess what? That Goldilocks phenomenon actually exists. And so I think that there's something there, and if we can kind of keep that in the back of our mind, that look, it's pretty rare. If ever, I don't know, I would love some examples of a truly linear phenomenon. Like some is good, more is always better, and that never ends. It never comes to a stopping point where enough is enough. I honestly can't think of it, right? I mean, we know that social status works that way, right? Like if you don't have enough, like there's a social gradient of health, that your health is going to be decreased. But we also know that when you get to the point of too much money, right, too much status, too much power, it actually seems to be negative. If nothing else, it flattens out. It doesn't go on forever, right? We know that with exercise. Certainly, like as a guy who's done some endurance sports, I mean, there's a lot of banter by endurance athletes about, what's this stuff about heart failure in men at the finish line in major endurance events? Well, of course it's possible. You can overuse your system just like you overuse anything else for that matter, right? I mean, look at it from a toxicology perspective, right? I mean, like that Advil when you're cranky, like it might actually work pretty well. Like, hey man, I had that cranky joint and I took that Advil and it feels a hell of a lot better. That doesn't mean you should take 50, right? Like there's a non-linear effect. And I think we have to be willing to sort of take that. And then I think the final one, the seventh truth, okay, on this little series is one that I think addresses that kind of non-linear U-shaped effect. Whether it be a happy face or a frowny face, the idea that it's a U-shaped phenomenon or a U-shaped phenomenon, right? So that's the seventh one, and that is always dress in layers, right? And so the idea is that it's always a good idea when going into the elements, when going into the unknown, to dress in layers. And I think that if we can keep that in mind, right, if we can kind of get people to understand that that's really what we're doing, right? So the essence of the Mona Lisa, right? As I understand it, in my simple terms, here's me making a very complex painting, very simple, is that it was done in layers. And it was done layer after layer after layer after layer, and painstakingly slowly done in layers, and that's what makes it so amazing. And so it gives it that sort of texture, that depth. And I think the same is true whether we think of it in training, whether we think of it in change, whether we think of it in building a new set of habits. We start small and we build up and we add a little bit more. And then we add a little bit more. And we see what the effect is and we add a little bit more. That's how we know we're going to keep an eye on that U-shaped phenomenon. We know, are we going to go too far? Are we going to go too little? So let me give you some examples of these 7 truths and how they apply to a population health framework. because this is where, as I started the conversation with, like, it's sort of like teaching season for me. This is where I think we need to go. So in CSM, I've got these 2 talks, and to be honest with you, like, this year should be a fun setup for me because I don't have to, like, put huge decks of slides together. I just kind of get up there and allow, I'm going to give it a few minutes to just sort of talk. But here's some simple truths that I think that we as a profession are struggling with, and we overall are struggling with. Like, we are not getting the idea of dressing in layers. We're trying to go from 0 to 100 miles an hour on things that we don't understand completely ourselves. So we're trying to put our stake in the ground and say, hey, like, we're the ones, like, come, talk to me because I know everything there is to know about this one little detail. And someone says, yeah, but how does that connect with that other little detail? And we go, I'm not really sure, I don't know that. Because we haven't thought of it in those terms. Holy smokes, that was fast. Okay, that's 15 minutes. But here's what I just want to leave you with. And I'm going to cover this as we go into CSM and really into teaching season now. And that is the idea that the messaging, the narrative, the conversation, that is going to matter more than anything else that we do in the current, in the next, let's say, 6 months to a year. Understanding simple concepts, understanding that there is a simple way to get enough health out of your body is going to be the most important, crucial thing that we can do going forward in any population. And the reason why is because it doesn't violate those 7 simple truths, right? It pulls people in. Let's connect first. Let's get you under the tent. Let's make you part of the team. Let's make it easy for you to succeed, right? It allows senses to be hijacked in a way that is positive. Like, let me give you some hope. Let me give you some joy. Let me show you that there's some compassion here as a professional and unleash the power that you have within you, right? Let's create some level of self-efficacy, okay? And I can tell you all the science of why that is, or I can just say, hey, do you see how that feels? You see how it feels to not feel helpless, to know that you've got a handle on this? But be careful. It's a U-shaped phenomenon, so let's not go crazy. Let's not get after it too much because I don't want you coming back here all beat up and banged up and sore and depressed again. Okay? And then understand that we're going to layer that in. We're going to take you 2 steps forward, then we're going to let you settle a little bit. Then we're going to take you 2 more steps forward. That's not necessarily a step back, but we're going to let this settle and layer. And slowly and steadily, you're going to see this effect. You're going to see things change. And what I really want you to pay attention to is that this is a non-linear effect. Is that when I get you moving fast enough, whatever that is, it's going to tip for you. Other people are going to want to connect with you. People are going to seek you out. And at that moment, your job as the client, consumer, employee, whatever, is to unleash their power in them. You pass it on. You pay it forward. Because when you do that, that's when things actually change. All right, I'm beyond 15 minutes. I think that was like an extra minute or so. I hope everyone has a great Monday. 7 simple truths, things to think about. Hit me back with your simple truths. I would love if I missed a few of them in there. There are simple things that you've been able to take complex, phenomena and pass it on to your clients, patients, friends, families. These are the kinds of conversations that we need. We need to have more of it. Okay, hit me on Twitter with it, or certainly if you're within the APHPT community, let's talk about it there. It is only Monday. Have a great Monday. Make it count.